I am here to introduce our speaker for the next session. This is Matt Singleton. He is the executive strategist at CrowdStrike and is a professor of cybersecurity at the University of Oklahoma. Before that, he was the chief information security officer for the state of Oklahoma, and prior to that, the chief operating officer for Oklahoma's Information Services Division. So he is here to please welcome Matt for his talk on In the Crosshairs, Public Sector Threat Brief. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Audio's good, right? Fantastic. Even in the back. You want me to talk louder? Turn it up. How about this? Test, test. Better? Okay, cool. Hey, thank you for having me today. I am so excited to be here. This is actually my first trip to Oregon. It is not going to be my last. Very, very, very amazing scenery, and coming from Oklahoma, the weather is fantastic. So thank you for having me here. I'm going to quickly kind of walk us through a threat brief that's specific to public sector. I have to first show you the obligatory bio slide. This is supposed to inspire confidence, build credibility. What it really does is tells you how old I am. I've been in this game for a long time. You can see I've got quite a bit of experience in government. You heard I was the state CISO for Oklahoma, worked a lot with law enforcement, worked a lot with the intelligence community. Spent a lot of time in higher education before going to the state, so there's a lot of folks in here that I think might be kindred spirits. I understand a lot of the pains you guys have been through. I am a university professor of cybersecurity at OU. The other OU, I think, is maybe appropriate. You guys know what that is. I'm also an executive strategist with CrowdStrike. No one ever knows what that is. So basically, in that role, I travel the nation and talk to cybersecurity professionals, mostly CISOs, but also managers and directors in cybersecurity, and I help them figure out hard problems. We build strategies. We've talked to a lot of folks right now about whole of state initiatives. I heard the representative talk about whole of government. That's actually what we called it in Oklahoma. These are big enterprise things that people are trying to do. They're hard. And I love helping people solve hard problems. So at some point, maybe we'll have a conversation around some of your hard problems. I'd love to do that. So today, we're going to quickly hit global threat, the global threat landscape, and then we'll move into public sector specific things. And because I don't want to be the wet blanket at the conference, I'm going to give you some hope at the end of this. And we'll talk about kind of some opportunities to make some improvements and maybe some resources that are available to you. So something to keep in mind when we're talking about threats. CrowdStrike has a different approach to cybersecurity. A lot of folks really kind of focus on defense in depth and making sure everything's patched all the time. But we've really kind of come to the realization that that's not practical, especially in large organizations like most of you represent. It's almost impossible to have everything patched all the time so that nobody can get in, right? Unless you turn it off, right? So we take an adversary first approach to cybersecurity. And the idea there is, hey, maybe I need to understand who's actually attacking us, why, what's motivating them, and what are their techniques, tactics, and procedures that they're typically using. And then maybe I focus my resources there first. I'm not going to discount the need to patch on a regular basis. Vulnerability management, patch management, these are important functions of cybersecurity. But at the same time, you don't have all the resources you need, right? Nobody does. Anybody? No, okay. It's important to prioritize and put those resources where they can have the greatest impact. And so when we start talking about the adversary, we focus on three main metrics: the volume of attacks, the speed of those attacks, and the sophistication. So let's talk about volume first. Between 2019 and 2020, you'll see there's a 300% increase in just the sheer volume of attacks that we're seeing globally. You say, Matt, that's Those are big numbers. That's a huge trend until you look at the last 2 years, right? A 500% increase. This is not going the direction we want it to go. The colors on the chart here kind of help identify the different groups or classifications of groups, the adversaries. So you can see the red group down there is your nation state actors. The blue group are folks that we haven't quite attributed yet. And then the green are the e-criminals. So you can see each of those areas, you're seeing significant increases. Some coming, some going, but generally an uptick all the way across the board. Speed is the second metric that we really focus on. We started measuring this back in 2018, and we focus on the breakout time. So if you guys are familiar with the MITRE attack framework, basically there are milestones in any attack. The breakout time is what happens between the initial foothold is gained and when the adversary starts doing stuff. So are they moving laterally? Are they escalating privileges? Between those 2 points, that's the breakout time. And so in 2018, when we were measuring this, it was almost 10 hours that it would take your average adversary to break out. Most organizations can probably deal with that, right? This last year, it's down to 79 minutes. How many of you guys can can respond to an adversary in 79 minutes? It's almost impossible. And you guys caught it, it's the average, right? You all know how averages work. That means some people take a lot longer to break out, but some folks take a lot less time. Last week we actually did a simulated attack in my class, and the breakout time was 4 minutes. Now that individual knew what he was doing, and it was a little bit of a controlled environment. 4 minutes that's pretty fast. So we talk about the need to adhere to a 1-10-60 rule. So in order to stay ahead of the adversary, if they're moving that fast, organizations have to be able to detect anomalies within 1 minute. They have to be able to investigate those within 10 minutes and really step in and mitigate it, take some sort of mitigating action within 60 minutes. You got to go fast to stay ahead of the adversary. And then the last metric that we focus on a global standpoint is sophistication. And probably the easiest way to think about this is malware-based attacks versus non-malware-based. So malware-based attacks, these are things that are viruses, worms, Trojans, your traditional things that you've probably all heard about over the last few decades, right? Non-malware based, this is hands-on keyboard. You got a bad guy that's actually in your environment. So again, we started looking at this metric in 2019, and we saw almost 2/3 of all attacks were malware-based at that time. Fast forward to this year, it's flipped. It's actually more than flipped. 71% of all attacks right now are hands-on keyboard. Why does this matter? Well, it's no longer okay just to have your legacy antivirus programs in place or any security solutions that are signature-based, because those just deal with things that you know about, and they're only as good as the latest definition that's been pulled down, right? So you have to have tools and people in place to deal with the adversary with hands-on keyboard. Just looking at the threat landscape over the years, and again, I've already dated myself, but I remember some of these attacks back in the 90s. You can kind of see the maturation of the attack process that our adversaries are using. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but basically, in the last 10 years, we've seen sophistication around phishing attacks, around specific ransomware attacks, and then you get into really kind of these hybrid things. And you heard some of the speakers talk about it. I think it was the CIO this morning mentioned how the adversaries are teaming up. They're focusing on their core competencies. And I'm going to outsource this thing because this isn't really what I do, but I'm going to reap the benefits of it by partnering with somebody else. That's why we talk about cybersecurity needing to be a team sport. Love the theme for this summit this time around, building community. We also track over 200 individual threat actors on a daily basis at CrowdStrike, and we group them into different areas based off of their motivations and their sponsorship. So state-sponsored adversaries, these are going to be folks that are based out of Russia or China, North Korea. You'll typically hear us refer to them by a cryptonym. So a panda, a bear, everybody knows Fancy Bear. Those types of, if you hear us talk about those threat groups, those are going to be nation state. E-criminals, this is organized crime, right? We refer to them as spiders. Who here has heard of scattered spider? One. Let's back up. Who here heard about the MGM and Caesar's Palace breaches in the last few weeks? The threat actor that's behind that is scattered spider. That's one of the groups that we've been tracking for a while. We understand their techniques, their tactics, their procedures, and what they're trying to accomplish. And it's interesting to watch how those TTPs actually morph over time given different vulnerabilities. But if you hear us talk about spider, it's a criminal. And then we have hacktivists and terrorists, and we kind of group them together. Hacktivists are typically looking to gain some notoriety through an attack. They're typically doing defacements, maybe distributed denial of service attacks. Terrorists, on the other hand, are fundraising. And they're recruiting and trying to do radicalization. And so we're tracking all of these different groups based off their motivations to really understand more about where we should be putting resources. So the current trends at the global level, I've already kind of mentioned the third-party software vulnerabilities. You got to patch your stuff. And you really need to start holding vendors accountable for producing secure products. You guys are all familiar. There's one provider in the space that is actually dedicated one day a month just for patching vulnerabilities. You guys have heard of Patch Tuesday, right? My team calls it Exploit Wednesday, right? It's important, and I pick on them just because they're big and they should know better. But a lot of providers are struggling in this space too. You really have to stay on top of not only like your productivity suites, but any third-party solutions that you're using. Typically, there's going to be software patches that are put out on a regular basis. Keep track of those. Stay on top of them. Cloud-based attacks, we'll talk a little bit more in detail in coming slides. And then identity-based bypass. And I haven't mentioned a whole lot about identity yet. Identity is a thing, folks. Over 80% of the successful breaches have been tied back to harvested credentials. So you guys worry about losing PII, you worry about losing other regulated data sets. You got to secure those identities. The adversaries are doing strange and wonderful things with the identities that they're stealing on a regular basis. So our cloud-based attacks, same thing. Volume is increasing, seeing a 95% increase year over year, but we're also seeing over a 300% increase in the adversaries that are starting to use cloud in support of their attacks. Why is that? It's the same reason all you guys are moving to the cloud, right? You want to have just-in-time resources, you want to be able to spin those things up, and you want to be able to be scalable. The adversaries are doing the exact same thing. They're going to customize their cloud environment based off whoever they're targeting and spin it up as they need to and tear it down. Another reason is because as you are moving to the cloud, you start trusting those cloud spaces, those cloud environments. The adversary knows that, and if they come in and say, you know what, I know this university is a huge AWS customer. I'm going to make my attack look like it's coming from AWS, so it's trusted. Those are the things that we kind of need to be thinking about. The last reason why the adversary is starting to do more in the cloud is because we all moved to the cloud really quick in the last 3 years. We had that whole pandemic thing that went down there for a while, and we had to switch how we were doing business. And a lot of organizations moved faster than their security team was able to handle. And so my recommendation, and everyone I'm talking to these days, is yep, absolutely, cloud's still the right answer. Go back and look at that environment, make sure it meets your security standards. because misconfiguration is one of the largest reasons why the adversary is being successful in cloud attacks. Yeah, Gartner says it's 99% of the successful attacks are due to human error. I mentioned the 80% figure, 80% of all successful breaches. The reason why this is becoming such a big deal is because of access brokers. There's basically a group of people, we kind of mentioned the leaning on each other for core competencies. Access brokers have emerged with a core competency of collecting identities and selling identities and making them available to other adversaries. And so we're seeing a whole lot of moving here. It's bad because it makes the attack successful. They're successful because it's really hard to determine whether it's a legitimate user that's doing legitimate things or it's the adversary with legitimate credentials doing nefarious things. To the point that the average dwell time with an identity-based attack is 250 days. Think about how much damage the adversary can do in your environment in 250 days. So we've started tracking individual credential advertisements on the dark web. I don't know if you guys noticed this, but the adversary likes to pick on academia. In some cases, it's 3 times as many in the last year as any other industry. So let's drill in just a little bit. Let's focus the scope just a little bit here to just public sector and healthcare, because I think that's pretty much everybody that's in the room, right? So this is based off of what we are seeing, scraping the dark web and understanding exactly what advertisements are going out there. I throw this up here because I think it's really interesting to see the trends, right? So I already mentioned the adversary likes to pick on academia. The spikes follow the academic year. So what happens right before April usually? Spring break. The adversary knows. People are going to take vacation time. They're not going to be here. I'm going to go play, right? Same thing happens at the end of the semester. You'll start seeing an uptick, especially as you get into the summer months, because they know, especially in academia, as soon as those students go home, that's a rest period for the staff and an opportunity for them to come in and do some real damage. So it's one thing for me to talk about dark web advertisement. Has anybody been on the dark web in the room? A couple of folks? If you don't have business being out there, don't be out there, right? But I do think it's important that you kind of see the sophistication of what's happening on the dark web. This is an actual advertisement for an actual identity for Northeastern Oklahoma State University. I pick on them because it's my home state, right? And it's probably too small for you to read here, but this thing reads like an eBay auction. They've actually, basically it says, we have a whole bunch of identities. We stole a whole bunch of data from this university. Tell us what you want and how much you're willing to pay, and we'll make a deal. Just out there on the dark web. If you guys want to actually read it, it's in the website. The PowerPoint deck's out there so you guys can get into it and read the actual deck. All right, so let's drill into the public sector specific threats. Why are we picking on public sector? There's a whole bunch of you, right? Huge user bases, whether we're talking about citizens, whether we're talking about students, faculty, staff. Because there's large user bases, that's a huge attack surface. So the adversary likes to pick on us. Most public sector organizations have public safety implications. We talk about life safety services that are provided. If I'm going for notoriety, and I can take down an entire city for 3 weeks like they were talking about in the panel, somehow that gets tied back to me as a hacktivist organization, that's exactly what I want, right? Diverse endpoints. This is me being nice. You guys have old stuff. Right? We talked about, when I was with the state, we talked about in terms of technology debt. But we typically underinvest in technology within the public sector. And so that means that you have operating systems that haven't been patched in decades, probably not decades, but 10 years, There's a few folks in here that still have Microsoft XP running in your environment. You don't have to raise your hand. I know. So does the adversary. And so they take advantage of that wherever they can. Got a lot of stakeholders when it comes to public sector. And, you know, I typically talk about it in terms of ransomware and double extortion. But recently, a independent school district in Texas came across a new tactic from our adversary. So they'd gone in, they'd ransomed the environment, they exfiltrated all the data from that school. The school board said, we're not paying your ransom. The adversary said, great, I'm not going to lock your stuff, but I am going to turn it loose on the internet. The school board said, I'm not going to pay your extortion. The adversary said, great, I've got phone numbers for all the parents in the district. I'm going to start calling them and threatening them. So this is a new deviation from typical tactics that we've seen with the adversary. They're starting to understand the nature of stakeholders and the power that these individuals have, and trying to find ways to leverage that. And I already mentioned you guys are under-resourced. A lot of you still exist in a federated security model as well, a federated IT model. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it makes it really hard to set standard controls across the board. And so the adversary knows that you've got gaps, and the adversary loves to hang out in those gaps where maybe tools or people aren't necessarily watching. I always get asked about the adversaries specific to this sector. And so again, I've kind of walked you through the different categories, but in the last year, we've identified 14 nation-state groups that are targeting public sector, 17 e-criminal organizations, and 4 hacktivists. Everybody always wants to know about the nation-state actors, so I just go ahead and put it on here. Got 3 China-based adversaries. They're typically interested in intellectual property. They're trying to steal information, inject that back into their technology development efforts within the nation, to stand on the shoulders of giants, right? That's that saying. North Korea identified 3. They're typically interested in money. And you'll see this with both North Korea and Iran. Heavily sanctioned countries, they're trying to inject actual money back into their economies because their trade is being inhibited. Russia, just 4 of those have been identified. They just like to mess with us. That's really all they're trying to do. And I probably should highlight Iran just a little bit because their tactics are typically destructive as well. There have been instances where Iranian threat actors have actually overclocked the CPU, turned off the system fan, and caused those machines to, the motherboards in those machines to actually melt. So they're actually trying to be disruptive as they leave. Targets, you guys know this, they're going after your mission critical stuff, whether that's OT, and I know there's a whole track on operational technology here at the summit. They're going after intellectual property, they're going after PII, and universities specifically typically have a lot of compute power and a lot of bandwidth. They try to weaponize those things and point them against other organizations. So things to be aware of. I'm going to skip over the ransomware and double extortion because I think the ISD example kind of explains that. I guess the only thing I would add to that is we're actually starting to see the adversary stop the encryption process because it's really difficult to actually unencrypt those things, track the keys, ensure you get payment for that. If I'm really just worried about the money, I'm going to extort the data and get you to pay me for the data. I don't really care about encrypting. All right, so enough wet blanket. I mentioned we need to be adhering to that 11060 rule. That really means dedicated 24/7 coverage. I'm excited to hear about the Center for Excellence and some of the things that are happening there, but ultimately organizations are going to have to come up to this level of staffing. Everyone in here is eligible to be part of the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center. If you are not currently a member, reach out, sign up. It's free. They do free services too, some of which I used at the state of Oklahoma. They were very powerful and they were very helpful. Oregon's going through a whole state initiative as well. This is where we're injecting federal funds into programs to jumpstart coordinated cybersecurity programs. Reach out to your state officials, see how you can participate in that. We also have a group within CrowdStrike called the Grants Office. What they do is they help our customers identify what grants they may be eligible for, and even help guide them through the application process. If you're interested in pursuing that, I'll point you at Caitlin right here in the front row. She can help get you engaged with our grants office, and they'll do all the research for you, and they'll help you through the process. You guys caught that identity's a thing, right? The largest identity system is typically Active Directory in any organization. We're doing free Active Directory risk assessments right now. I said free, right? Give you an opportunity to kind of see the current health of your Active Directory, where you have some risks. Again, Caitlin's your gal. And we talked a little bit about the cloud threats, doing the same thing for your cloud environments. If you're interested in seeing where you have some vulnerabilities, again, completely free. Caitlin is your gal there. And I'll wrap this up just by giving you, this is the slide that I often use. I mentioned, my job is to help people solve difficult problems. Ultimately, they're trying to build a robust cybersecurity program. That's what it looks like on one slide. It's busy, right? There's a lot of information there, but you can see kind of the 6 main functions of a cybersecurity program and the sub-functions within each of those. Ultimately, that's what I look for. In closing, if you aren't afraid, you should be. We are facing an extremely intelligent and sophisticated adversary, and you should get started, right? A lot of times folks want to have the perfect plan. They want to make sure all the stakeholders are bought in. That stuff comes later. Get started. There are things you can do right now that cost nothing but your time, and you can start improving your cybersecurity posture immediately. Thank you for your time this morning. I'll hang around for questions afterward.